Scarlett Monroe hadn't heard his name aloud in 2 years. But when she saw it embossed in glimmering gold across the wedding invitation, it struck her harder than she expected. Grayson Wolfe, the man who once traced constellations on her back beneath winter stars, was now getting married to someone else. She stared at the ornate envelope, her hands trembling as the reality seeped into her veins like ice water. He had walked out of her life without a warning, without closure, leaving behind whispers of promises and footprints in snow that melted far too quickly. The invitation was crisp, luxurious, and arrogant in its elegance, as if it came from someone who had never known the ache of being left behind. 2 years of silence, 2 years of heartbreak, 2 years of pretending to move on. Yet here he was again, not in person, but as a wound reopened. The gold lettering shimmered under her tears, mocking her with every curve of scripted joy. He was marrying Tessa Harrow, a name she'd seen splashed across magazines, the daughter of a senator, the embodiment of polished perfection. Scarlett sat frozen, her eyes locked on the words, "You are cordially invited," and wondered who had the audacity to think she would celebrate the man who broke her. Her fingers, slender and steady once, now trembled like branches in a storm as memories began to claw their way back. Memories of laughter in candlelit rooms, of stolen mornings, of whispered forevers that turned into ghosts. She could almost hear his voice in the back of her mind, that deep velvet tone saying her name like it was a vow, like it meant something, before he vanished without a trace. No call, no explanation. Nothing but a void where love used to live. People called him a visionary, sharp, brilliant, untouchable. But Scarlett had once touched the heart behind the empire, the man beneath the title. Or at least she thought she had. Maybe he had never been real. Maybe Grayson Wolfe was always an illusion dressed in charm. Her best friend Delilah sat across the table, frowning as she read the invitation over her shoulder, then muttered, "He wants a reaction. Don't give him one." But how could she not react when the man who shattered her was celebrating his love just a few miles away, under a sky they once dreamed beneath? Was this a warning, a cruel joke, or a desperate attempt to prove he'd won? Scarlett's mind swirled with questions, and none had gentle answers. Maybe he wanted her to see what she'd lost. Maybe he wanted to stand tall while she broke all over again in a room full of strangers. Or maybe it was Tessa's idea. Beautiful, brilliant Tessa, with her lineage and cold smile. Perhaps she wanted Scarlett to watch from the shadows, to drown in her inadequacy. But Scarlett wasn't that girl anymore. She had rebuilt from ash, risen from abandonment with fire in her bones. Yet part of her, the part still aching for answers, wanted to look him in the eye and ask why. Why did he leave? Why without goodbye? Why when she needed him the most? She had spent months staring at doorways, hoping he would return, only to be met with silence. And now, 2 years too late, he was reaching out through an invitation, an ornate, cruel reminder that she was disposable. But he didn't know everything. He didn't know about the nights she cried herself to sleep holding a photograph. He didn't know about the life she had carried after he left, about the miracle born of their final night together. Grayson Wolfe didn't know he had a son. Her heart clenched around that secret, the weight of it as heavy as betrayal. She had kept it hidden, protected it like a sacred flame, because telling him meant reopening the past, and she wasn't sure he deserved to know. But now fate had delivered a stage, and Scarlett found herself at a crossroads. Could she walk into that wedding, into his perfect glossy world, and look him in the eye with the truth burning beneath her ribs? Could she stand before him, beautiful and composed, while the truth he abandoned stared back through the blood of his own child? Or should she stay home, clutching the memory of a love that never deserved her in the first place? Scarlett rose slowly from her chair, the invitation still clenched in her hand. Her heart thundered, not with love, but with the hunger for answers, for closure, for reckoning. She wasn't the broken girl he left behind. She was a woman now, with a secret that could ruin him or redeem him. And maybe, just maybe, the time had come to let the truth breathe. Grayson Wolfe stood on the edge of his balcony, the breeze from the lake brushing his jawline as he gazed across the glassy surface. But even nature's serenity couldn't silence the war inside his chest. The estate, a masterpiece of steel and stone, reflected his empire, immaculate, controlled, enviable. Yet beneath the grandeur, he felt like a fraud. The wedding was only days away, and every detail had been curated to perfection. The rare orchids flown in from Japan, the diamond-encrusted cutlery, the quartet rehearsing for the ceremony under a private conductor's guidance. The media would eat it up. Grayson Wolfe, tech titan, marrying American royalty, Tessa Harrow. The guest list sparkled with senators, CEOs, and influencers. But one name burned brighter than all the rest in his mind: Scarlett Monroe. Her name was the ember he thought he had buried, but it refused to die. When Tessa suggested sending her an invitation, it was cloaked in icy sweetness, but Grayson had seen the venom behind her smile. "Let her see what she lost," she whispered as though she was offering him a gift. He nodded at the time, told himself it was closure, justice, a full circle moment. But now, standing in the silence of his empire, he felt the weight of that choice pressing like a stone against his ribs. He had everything money could buy, but peace had never once come with the price tag. Behind every press photo and smug business article was a man haunted by the what-ifs he never dared voice. Scarlett's laugh still echoed in his memory, unpolished and genuine, like the first bite of spring after a brutal winter. Her green eyes had stripped him of pretense, disarmed him in ways billion-dollar deals never could. But he hadn't fought for her. He hadn't stayed. Instead, he had retreated into silence, letting her believe she was easy to leave, when the truth was she was the one thing he could never face. Because with Scarlett, he had been raw, imperfect, vulnerable. With Tessa, he wore the armor of predictability, of power, of legacy. But that armor felt heavier each day, suffocating him in a love story he no longer believed in. He clenched the edge of the railing, the cool metal grounding him, but not enough to shake the vision that haunted his nights. Scarlett walking through the ballroom doors, her presence alone unraveling the illusion he'd spent 2 years constructing. Would she look at him with heartbreak or hatred? Would her eyes accuse him? Or would they be indifferent, proof that she had truly moved on? He didn't know which scared him more. In meetings, he spoke with the certainty of kings. But this aching vulnerability, was unfamiliar and unwelcome. He remembered their last winter together, how her breath turned to clouds in the cold as she laughed beside him, curled in his coat. That night, something had shifted inside him, something tender, terrifying, and too real. So he did what he always did when life became too honest. He ran. Now he would marry a woman whose world fit his on paper, but whose touch left him numb. Tessa was elegance, a sculpted perfection that made sense in headlines, but she had no patience for messy hearts or unfinished stories. Grayson turned from the lake, running a hand through his dark hair, jaw tight with the weight of consequences. The press saw a man who built empires, but not the man who destroyed the only thing that had ever truly felt like home. Inviting Scarlett had awakened a storm he wasn't ready for. He wasn't afraid of confrontation, he feared clarity. What if seeing her again reminded him of everything he had chosen to forget? What if she smiled without him, more radiant than ever, a living testament to the life he forfeited? Worse, what if she looked right through him, as if he were a stranger now? That kind of indifference would break him more than rage ever could. Grayson felt the tug of guilt, thick and relentless, as if it had waited 2 years for this moment to return. He whispered her name under his breath, almost a prayer, almost a curse. He didn't know what her presence would bring, tears, anger, or a reckoning. But he knew one thing: the past wasn't done with him. And as the sun sank over the water in golden silence, he felt the first crack in his mask. Would she cry or burn the room down? And when the flames caught, would he finally let himself feel the fire or run again? The grand ballroom shimmered under a cascade of crystal chandeliers, their light casting glittering patterns on the polished marble floor, where high society had gathered in their finest silks and tailored suits. The air thick with whispered anticipation and the sweet scent of fresh orchids that adorned every corner. Grayson stood tall at the altar, the very picture of composure and success. His sharp navy tuxedo fitting him like a second skin, the piercing blue of his eyes scanning the room with a practiced calm. Yet beneath the surface, a tempest raged, each heartbeat pounding louder in his chest as the minutes to the ceremony slipped away. Beside him, Tessa Harrow, the flawless bride with her sculpted features and poised smile, radiated a controlled elegance. But Grayson felt the subtle tremble in her grip as her hand clenched his arm tighter than necessary, a silent warning that something was coming, something neither of them was prepared to face. And then, as if summoned by fate itself, the massive doors at the far end of the room swung open with a slow, deliberate grace, and time seemed to freeze as every eye turned toward the figure who stepped into the golden light. Scarlett Monroe. The crowd's collective breath hitched in a wave of surprise and disbelief, a ripple of gas fluttering through the room like a sudden gust of wind through autumn leaves. Scarlett emerged like a flame amidst the gilded decor, her fitted crimson gown hugging her curves with a daring elegance, the rich fabric shimmering subtly under the chandeliers, while her hair tumbled in soft, effortless curls down her back, framing a face that was both hauntingly beautiful and resolutely unyielding. Her lips, painted the shade of deep ruby, curled into a quiet smile that held the weight of every sorrow and every victory she had carried alone. And her eyes, those fierce emerald eyes, were steady and bright, no longer pools of pain, but fierce orbs of fire and grace. Grayson's breath caught in his throat, his heart pounding as if it were trying to break free from the cage of his ribs. And in that moment, every lie he had told himself over the past 2 years shattered into dust. Tessa's hand tightened, her nails digging into his skin, her lips parting in a sharp whisper, but her words were lost beneath the electric hum of murmurs that swept through the guests, their voices a mixture of curiosity, judgment, and barely concealed excitement at the drama unfolding before them. Whispers danced through the air like wildfire, igniting the tension that had been simmering just beneath the surface, each guest eager to witness the confrontation they all knew was inevitable. Yet no one dared to look away. Scarlett's smile widened ever so slightly, a quiet defiance that spoke volumes. A woman who had weathered storms, who had risen from the ashes of heartbreak with a strength no one had anticipated. When her gaze locked with Grayson's, the room seemed to shrink, the noise fading until there was only the silent exchange of 1,000 unsaid words. Memories etched deep into the lines of their faces, the warmth of shared laughter and the sting of unspoken betrayals flickering like shadows between them. A spark ignited, fierce and undeniable, illuminating the years lost and the wounds yet to heal. And though they stood surrounded by the glittering facade of wealth and celebration, beneath it all was a raw, aching truth that neither money nor pride could disguise. Scarlett was not a woman broken by the past. She was a force of nature, a revelation wrapped in fire and grace. And she had come not to mourn what was lost, but to reclaim what had been stolen. Her presence was a bold statement, a challenge thrown down at the feet of everyone who had doubted her. And in that moment, Grayson felt the full weight of his choices bearing down on him. The silences, the lies, the years of running from the only love that had ever mattered. The ceremony that was meant to be a testament to new beginnings suddenly transformed into a battleground of hearts where every glance, every breath, every heartbeat was a battle between past regrets and future possibilities. As Scarlett took a step forward, the crowd held its breath, caught in the suspended moment between what was and what could be, the air electric with the promise of revelations yet to come. She was not just a memory. She was a living, breathing story that refused to be silenced. And as Grayson's eyes never left hers, the truth shimmered in the space between them, fragile, fierce, and impossible to ignore. The reception hall, draped in cascading white silk and twinkling fairy lights, buzzed with an energy that felt both intoxicating and suffocating. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses weaving a backdrop to the storm, brewing quietly between Scarlett and Grayson. She moved through the crowd like a haunting melody, an echo from a past he had tried desperately to bury. Every step she took, sending ripples through his carefully constructed world. Her presence piercing the veneer of celebration, with the weight of unspoken truths. Grayson found himself drawn toward her, as if pulled by an invisible thread, his heart pounding against the cage of his ribs, his breath catching in the hollow space where hope and regret collided. When he finally reached her, the tension was palpable, thickening the air between them like a silent storm. "You came," he said, his voice rougher than he intended, betraying the vulnerability he fought to conceal. Scarlett's eyes locked onto his, fierce and unwavering, as she replied with a voice that was both sweet and sharp. "You invited me." The simple truth hung between them like a blade glinting in the dim light, a reminder of all the walls they had built and the walls yet to be torn down. "Why?" Grayson asked, his tone low, a mixture of confusion and a desperate need to understand the enigma standing before him. Scarlett leaned closer, her breath warm against his ear, her words a whisper coated with steel. "To show you that I survived what you did." Her declaration hit him with the force of a tidal wave, crashing over years of silence and denial, forcing him to confront the pain he had caused and the woman he had left behind, not broken, but stronger, fiercer, alive. As they spoke beneath the soft glow of golden chandeliers, the space between them thickened with memories that stirred old feelings, tender, raw, and dangerous, like embers that refused to die out. There was a vulnerability in her gaze that cracked through his defenses, a longing that echoed his own. And for a fleeting moment, the world around them faded, leaving only the fragile connection rekindling in the quiet intimacy of shared pain. Then, as if to shatter the fragile calm, Scarlett reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone, the screen illuminating her determined face as she swiped to a photo, a small boy with eyes that mirrored Grayson's own, piercing blue and full of innocence, and a silent question. "His name is Liam," she breathed, her voice trembling but steady. "He's yours." The words hung in the air, slicing through the revelry and reverberating in Grayson's soul like a thunderclap. Time seemed to halt, the room's noise fading to a distant hum as the reality of what she revealed shattered the fragile illusions he'd built around himself. The boy in the photo wasn't just a symbol of a past they had tried to erase. It was a living, breathing link that demanded acknowledgement, a bond that changed everything. Grayson's mind raced, caught between disbelief and the overwhelming surge of emotions, fear, hope, guilt, and an aching desire to make right what had long been wrong. Scarlett's steady gaze held him captive, fearless in the face of his shock, her strength a beacon in the sea of uncertainty that threatened to consume them both. Around them, the guests remained oblivious to the seismic shift that had taken place, their laughter and conversations now a distant echo to the profound moment shared between two souls tethered by a truth that cut deeper than any betrayal or heartbreak. Grayson's voice finally found him, a broken whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" Scarlett's eyes glistened with unshed tears, a mix of pain and defiance. "Because I had to survive first. Because I wasn't sure if you wanted to know." The weight of those words settled heavily between them, revealing the years of solitude and struggle Scarlett had endured alone. And yet beneath the sorrow, there was a flicker of hope. Hope that this revelation, painful as it was, might be the beginning of healing, of redemption, of a future neither dared to imagine until now. The fragile silence that followed was filled with the promise of things left unsaid, the painful silence that spoke louder than words ever could, and the dawning realization that their story was far from over. It was just beginning to unfold anew. Grayson stepped away from the crowded noise of the ballroom, as if fleeing from a storm within himself, the grandeur of the reception fading behind him as he sought refuge in the cool night air, where the sky began to weep soft, relentless rain that felt like a mirror to the broken promises and shattered dreams that had haunted him for years. Scarlett followed silently, her footsteps tentative yet resolute, closing the distance between them like a bridge built on fragile hope and unresolved pain. The garden was quiet except for the sound of rain tapping against leaves and the distant hum of laughter now muffled by the night. As Grayson's voice finally broke through the silence, raw and aching, "You kept him from me," he whispered, the weight of those words hanging heavily between them like a confession long suppressed. Scarlett's eyes glistened in the dim light, reflecting the storm both outside and within, as she met his gaze with a truth that had been buried beneath years of hurt. You left me with no choice. You vanished without a trace. Between them stretched a silence so profound it echoed the years of absence, the kind of silence that gnaws at the soul and leaves a hollow ache deeper than words can reach. But then, as if drawn by an invisible thread of longing and regret, Grayson stepped forward, closing the gap between their aching hearts, his voice breaking with vulnerability. I never stopped loving you. Scarlett's tears mingled with the raindrops tracing silent paths down her cheeks, and she whispered back, Love doesn't abandon. In that moment, the storm around them became a witness to their shared sorrow and fragile hope, the rain washing away the years of bitterness and betrayal. When Grayson reached out to touch her face, there was no hesitation, no retreat, only the slow, aching acceptance of two souls desperately seeking to heal. Their kiss was unlike any they had ever shared. It wasn't the fiery passion of youth, but a quiet, trembling blend of pain, forgiveness, and the weight of everything left unsaid. It was slow and tender, a healing balm for wounds carved deep by time and silence, an unspoken promise that despite the scars, there was still something worth fighting for. Beneath the dark, rain-soaked sky, wrapped in the intimacy of that moment, they found a heartbeat, steady, true, and fiercely alive, beating for both of them, a fragile thread binding their fractured past to a possibility of redemption and love reborn. Tessa's eyes burned with a tempest of fury and betrayal as she stood on the balcony overlooking the unfolding chaos below. Every detail of the night unraveling like a carefully woven tapestry, torn apart by harsh, unforgiving hands. The sparkling chandeliers that once promised a celebration now cast fractured light on a scene charged with raw emotion and shattered dreams. She had thought this evening would cement her place beside Grayson Wolfe, the powerful, untouchable man she had convinced herself she could claim. But instead, she felt the sting of humiliation curling in her chest, a bitter poison born from the truth she never dared admit aloud. He did not love her. With trembling hands and a voice sharp enough to cut through the murmurs of the guests, she confronted Grayson, her words laced with pain and accusation. You humiliated me. Yet Grayson, his gaze steady and heavy with the weight of his own remorse, met her with a quiet honesty that stunned even himself. No, he replied softly. We humiliated each other. His voice broke with the cruel realization that the life they were about to bind together was built on a foundation of lies and unspoken truths. I can't marry someone I don't love, he confessed, a confession that rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. The declaration was a death knell for the wedding, and the event that should have been a joyous union became a public spectacle of heartbreak and scandal, the news spreading like wildfire through social circles and media outlets alike. But amidst the swirling gossip and flashing cameras, Scarlett Monroe remained an island of calm, her heart heavy yet resolute as she clutched the photo of Liam, her son, close to her chest. There was no celebration in her silence, no vindictive smile, only the quiet strength of a woman who had fought to survive and now guarded her fragile family fiercely. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the storm of the evening settled into a tense stillness, Grayson sought her out, driven by a newfound determination to face the consequences of the past and the hope of a future that seemed both daunting and necessary. His voice, steady but laced with vulnerability, broke the silence. I want to know my son. I want to earn the right to know you again. Scarlett studied him carefully, searching for the truth beneath the words, the sincerity behind the apology, and the courage to face what lay ahead. Words are easy, Grayson, she said, her tone firm but not unkind. Show me with action. He nodded, understanding the gravity of her challenge. The long, winding road toward trust and redemption, stretching before them like an uncertain path shrouded in shadows and light. Yet in that moment, beneath the quiet night sky, there was a flicker of something fragile and real, a chance that love, scarred and battered but unbroken, might find a way to heal the wounds of the past and build something stronger, something true. The night held its breath as they stood together, two souls weathered by pain, but drawn toward a fragile hope, knowing that the journey ahead would test every ounce of their strength, every fiber of their hearts. But perhaps they thought love was never meant to be easy. It was meant to be fought for, earned, and cherished in the face of every storm. Months slipped by gently, each day folding into the next like the soft pages of a book they were finally ready to write together. The glittering world Grayson had once commanded, the empire built on cold ambition and distant suits, began to fade behind him, replaced by something infinitely more fragile and beautiful. A small house on the edge of town, where laughter was the loudest music and love was spoken in the quiet moments between chaos and calm. Liam's footsteps pattered down the wooden floors, a small burst of energy and innocence that shattered the silence that had once wrapped around Grayson like a suffocating cloak. When the little boy ran into his arms, shouting, "Daddy!" the sound was like a key unlocking something deep inside, a locked chest of memories, regrets, and hopes long buried beneath layers of pride and pain. The hug that followed was not just between father and son. It was a healing balm, a silent apology, and a promise all wrapped into one. Scarlett watched the scene unfold from the doorway, her heart swelling with emotions too complex for simple words. There was a softness in her gaze that had not been there before, a softness born from years of heartache, tempered by strength and fueled by the fragile but growing trust she was learning to rebuild. The woman who had once felt abandoned, hurt, and betrayed was beginning to see the man before her not as a ghost from a painful past, but as someone real, flawed, and willing to fight for a future that once seemed impossible. Grayson had traded the blinding lights of the city and the constant pressure of success for quiet mornings filled with Liam's laughter. Gentle evenings where conversations weren't rushed or filled with unspoken resentments, and simple dinners that tasted like home. In those small, everyday moments, the layers of their old wounds began to peel away, revealing glimpses of the love that had never truly died. Scarlett's doubts still lingered, shadows that crept in during lonely nights or moments of silence. But Grayson met each one with patience and unwavering presence. He showed her through actions rather than words, proving day by day that he was not the man who left her broken, but the man who was willing to rebuild every shattered piece with care. One evening, as the sky blazed with the fiery colors of sunset, casting a golden glow over the modest home that had become their sanctuary, Grayson found the courage that had eluded him for years. He knelt on the soft grass, the weight of his past mistakes heavy in the air, but his eyes fixed firmly on Scarlett's. His voice was steady, yet laced with vulnerability, as he spoke the truth that had been buried too long. Not for redemption, not for guilt, but because I love you. The words were a seed planted in the fertile ground of their renewed connection, fragile yet full of promise. Scarlett's breath hitched, tears spilling freely as the storm of emotions she'd carried for so long finally found release. Through her tears she smiled, a smile that was both a question and a vow. Only if it's a love that never runs again. In that moment, time seemed to pause, the world narrowing to just the two of them, their past, their pain, and their hopes intertwining in a delicate dance of forgiveness and longing. Grayson gently lifted her hand, pressing a tender kiss to her knuckles, a silent pledge that this time he would stay. This was no longer a story of loss or betrayal, but one of resilience and rebirth. They stood together as the sun dipped below the horizon, shadows retreating to make way for the light of a new chapter. One written not with the ink of sorrow, but with the golden glow of love that chooses to endure, no matter the cost. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be moments when doubt whispered in the quiet and old scars throbbed beneath the surface. But together they were ready to face whatever storms might come, knowing that this time their hearts beat in unison, stronger, wiser, and unbreakable. And so, from the ashes of what was lost, Scarlett and Grayson stepped hand in hand into a future shaped by hope, courage, and a love that, at last, would never run again.